All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us here for the CLE. This is the March installment of the HYLF Fellows Committee CLE initiative that we started at the beginning of the bar year. We've been trying to bring a variety of different topics to you, mostly focusing on nonprofit issues. So my name is Daniel O'Neill, along with Miriam Anna. We are the co-chairs of the HYLF Fellows Committee for this bar year. In my day job, when I'm not doing HYLF Fellows Committee stuff, I'm a partner in the Houston office of Thompson Co. So what I'm here to talk about today is a topic that I think is very interesting because I spend a lot of my day job doing this. So I want to thank you all for joining us here today. If you all have any questions, please throw them in the chat, or since we're doing this Brady Bunch style, you're more than welcome to, come on camera, just ask it. Don't be shy if you have questions. So I'm going to share my screen and then we'll get things up and running. Okay, so if I've done this correctly, you all should be looking at the PowerPoint. Somebody let me know if you are not looking at the PowerPoint. Okay, well, it looks like we're all good. So the topic that we're here to talk about, what's trending in professional liability claims and litigation. This is the 2024 edition. We're talking about nonprofit D&O claims and litigation. As I always do with my opening statements and when I'm trying to teach a CLE, I throw a number up there on the first slide, and there's a reason why I do that. I specifically, when I have a topic in mind I want to present on or I'm asked to present on, I talk to people who know nothing about the topic, and I ask them, what are you interested in learning about? What do you want to hear about? What are the kind of questions you have? And then I try to do kind of a composite, and I will put together, kind of what my 2 or 3 learning objectives are. And that's what I try and structure my CLE or my opening statement around, as I'm trying to educate and answer some of the kind of common questions people have about what is going on, why this is an interesting topic, or at least why do I think it's an interesting topic. And I'm going to try and convince everybody through my advocacy skills of why this is an interesting topic. So the 3 things that I would like you all to walk away from at the end of the hour are, number 1, why are nonprofits getting sued? Most people are a little surprised outside of the nonprofit world that nonprofits of all things could get sued. So that's probably the bulk of the presentation. We're going to talk about why nonprofits get sued. Number 2, we're going to talk about insurance coverage issues, kind of related. If you all watched the amazing presentation that we put on last month with Ben Ritz and Dominic Ruprecht, there was a very, very interesting and very helpful topic where they talked about coverage issues and why pleading, needs to be done a certain way or massaged a certain way just within the corners of what the petition is. So we're not going to do as much of a deep dive on that. This is really just kind of a continuation of that discussion. For y'all who are not familiar with who I am and what I do, I am a gold star on the defense side. I've only ever been on the defense side. I've never had any interest in being on the plaintiff side of one of these cases. So this is not, we're not going to be bashing the plaintiff side at all on this, but this presentation is coming from somebody who only has defense side experience. So you have to take some of this with a grain of salt just from the defense side. And then number 3, we're going to talk about why there's absolutely no stigma if your nonprofit gets sued. It happens all the time. We're going to talk about that in a little more detail. So those are the 3 learning objectives we're going to go throughout the rest of the hour on. If we've reached the end of the presentation and you all feel like we have maybe neglected some of that, please ask a question. Let's do some follow-up, because these are the 3 things I'd like you all to walk away from the presentation with. Okay, so this is a topic that sits squarely within the world of professional liability. That's the kind of umbrella that we're talking about. So what exactly is professional liability? The big ones, and that are really going to impact what we're talking about the rest of the day today, in terms of nonprofit D&Os, we're talking about legal malpractice. I think almost everybody on the call, at least right now, is a lawyer, so that's the big bad that we're all worried about at the end of the day. Accounting malpractice, especially auditors. We're going to talk about that in a little more detail, why why auditors are getting lit up so much right now in these kind of cases. Financial advisors, they're seeing a lot of action right now. And they get really plugged into the nonprofit community just because they are usually master networkers. And nonprofits usually like having somebody who is that good and that skilled and likes talking to people on a daily basis. So financial advisors usually offer something specific to a nonprofit D&O board that is unique and specific, and usually a little different than what we're looking for out of when it's an accountant that is trying to be recruited into a nonprofit board, and which is considerably different from some of the skill sets that the lawyers that are being recruited for nonprofit D&O boards, or nonprofit boards, are usually bringing to the table. Professional liability also includes medical malpractice. We see doctors trying to be recruited for tons of nonprofit boards. It's because they are very well connected. They have quite a bit of education. They're very active in the community. So they're bringing a lot to nonprofit boards that's, it's slightly different, it's slightly unique compared to what the lawyers, the accountants, and the financial advisors are bringing. So, at the end of the day, this is a huge topic when we're talking about professional liability. We haven't even scratched the surface of it. There's also professional liability claims against realtors and brokers on the residential real estate side. There is insurance agents and brokers. There's also the entire kind of construction world, everything from the architects, engineers, designers, surveyors, everything else under the sun. And then on the other end of the spectrum of professional liability kind of cases, there are also D&Os and for-profit corporations. So those kind of cases do work different for a number of different reasons than in nonprofits. So while there is a little bit of overlap, those are so different, we're not really going to be talking about that today, since what we're trying to focus on is nonprofit D&Os. Okay, so I happen to be a quantitative person. I always like putting some numbers out there before we really dive into some of the topics. So why are we here? Just let's talk some numbers. There are over 2 million nonprofit board seats that are filled annually around the country. That's a lot of nonprofit board seats when you think about it. There are over 1.6 million nonprofit organizations in the US currently. And there are many more you have not heard of than the big ones everybody's heard of, like United Way, Susan Komen, the kind of kitchen table names that you've heard before. 2 out of every 3 nonprofit organizations covered by an insurance policy have filed a D&O claim in the prior 10 years. Every time I tell somebody that, the jaw hits the floor, but that's what the statistics bear out. There's usually one factor that will determine whether a nonprofit organization is getting hit with the D&O claim within the last 10 years. We will talk about that in just a moment. It is just kind of interesting what the statistics are, that it kind of comes down to one thing, considering how many different kinds of lawsuits can arise from nonprofit D&O operations. So D&O claims are filed more than twice as much against nonprofits than for-profit companies. That's also one of those really kind of interesting things to think about, is that, when you hear about the big Fortune 500s that are getting sued, we hear about those. Those are on the news. They're on the Twitter app. Everybody kind of talks about those, but unless you're plugged into the nonprofit community, you probably are not hearing about the suits against the nonprofits as much as you are the for-profit companies. Okay. So yeah, I guess the first thing we're addressing is, yes, nonprofits do get sued. They get sued all the time. So if you are serving on a nonprofit board, I'm glad you're here. This is good stuff you're hearing about. Recommend people watch the YouTube after the YouTube gets posted if they're not here live. So why are nonprofits a growing target right now? So the general rule is, everybody that went through law school knows anybody can sue anybody for anything at any time. That's just the reality of how the justice system works. That general rule is out in full force and effect on nonprofit D&O kind of claims. Nonprofit D&O claims always have an element of airing dirty laundry and trying to throw mud. It's a very reputational based kind of complaint. So when we see an original petition, you can read through it, and there are some things that are really just going to kind of leap off the page. There's always some implications about what is being pled. Sometimes it's a pro se plaintiff, sometimes it is a firm, plaintiff side firm that has experience with these kind of cases. Sometimes it is, just for example, a family law or a personal injury lawyer who has never done a nonprofit D&O case, but that's what walked in through the door. They think it's interesting. They go ahead and file suit. So the reason why the implications of the original petition can usually be very enlightening. You can usually tell who wrote the petition, whether it's copy pasted, whether it's just a form kind of petition, whether the person who is actually aggrieved with whatever alleged incidents have happened, what they're actually upset about. And you can almost count it by, if you do a word count, and you cut down kind of the causes of action. You take a look at where they're spending their time arguing, what kind of facts they're arguing. It is usually easy for you to tell what they are upset about, regardless of what's actually being pled and what they're asking for. There's always some kind of implications. So that's always a good first place to start. If you are coming into the suit when all you have is the original petition, you know nothing else, take a look at it, see where the real estate of the original petition is spending time. Another kind of interesting nuance of these claims in litigation against nonprofit D&O is there is usually starting off an attempt to reach the personal assets of the board members. And that, whether that is like plain obvious or you just need to kind of look at what the implications are, there's usually going to be some kind of focus or attention that is paid to maybe what kind of car the executive director or whoever the person is being complained about, what kind of car they drive. Or maybe they have a Rolex watch. And if that ends up in the original petition, that's already telling you they're going after personal assets. Whether that's actually going to be a possibility in the suit is something completely different, and we will talk about that in a little bit. But there's usually some kind of element, if they're talking about fancy things one way or another, that is something that, really just kind of leaps off the page at you. In a normal professional liability suit against a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, usually it is not relevant and nobody is going to spend any time talking about what kind of shoes the lawyer, accountant, doctor wears. Whereas in a nonprofit case, yeah, they absolutely may say, oh, this so-and-so on the board was wearing Christian Louboutins. I don't think I pronounced that correctly, so my apologies. But yeah, so that's one of those things you just need to watch out for, because it's usually telling you, that's if they're trying to reach the personal assets of the board, you need to evaluate the claim a little differently than you would if stuff like that is not even in the petition. In addition to this airing dirty laundry, whether the facts are true or not, if they could just be invented, that's a possibility. There's this professional rule out there: your reputation takes years to build and only a minute to destroy. That's why these cases have been really growing in popularity so much, because it can take such a minor thing for somebody to get upset and either file a pro se or go out and find a lawyer who wants to take the case. And all this is just kind of personal animosity about maybe some slight that, for whoever the person allegedly doing the thing, that was just a normal Tuesday. Whereas, the person that perceived this to be a slight, they're willing to literally make a federal or state case out of it. And based on what is in the original petition, sometimes that is very obvious that this is just trying to ruin someone's reputation, and that's all it is. But you only know that if you read the original petition and as part of your overall investigation into what is going on in the case. Last but not least, the reason why these kind of claims are growing so much are it gets headlines. The general way to think about these, and the way that the mainstream media likes to report on them, it's the good blank goes bad. It's this good charitable minded person for 20 years. Suddenly they're embezzling from the nonprofit, and they shouldn't be doing that. And that makes just a really good somebody who has an editor and all that. I mean, that makes a really snappy headline. If y'all read nonprofit news or you've heard about any of the big cases going on right now, these can be a devastating headline. Uh, so for the kind of cases that I handle, specifically, we're not talking about any other ones I've handled or I personally know anything about. That's I think for obvious reasons. Nothing about today is legal advice. This is all for entertainment. I do have some kind of case examples from other people who shared nondescript kind of basic information. So we will talk about some kind of case studies of just what kind of claims are out there in this world. But one of the ones that I specifically cannot talk about because it's active litigation, it's been in not just national news, but international news. And it is, of course, not fairly reported at all. But the news just takes it and runs with it. And sometimes you just need to deal with that when you're working in this area. So that is just something to keep in mind. The press is out there in this corner of the world because the headlines are, more or less the good nonprofit has just turned evil and is hurting people and something like that. Okay, so let's talk a little more about who is actually coming after nonprofits these days. There is a lot of words on the slide because a lot more people are coming after nonprofits than you would probably think. So when just the first two bullet points here, current employees and former employees, these make up the vast bulk of who is filing these nonprofit D-No claims and who is pursuing litigation right now. So one factor more than anything else is a supermajority of the kind of cases that are getting filed. So if your nonprofit has either current and or former employees, you are considerably more likely to get hit with one of these D-No claims. And that is 2 out of every 3 nonprofit organizations covered by an insurance policy have filed a D&O claim in the prior 10 years. Depending on who you ask, it's either 80 to almost 90%. And there's an asterisk and a reason for some of the asterisks. So it's anywhere from 80 to 90%, depending on who you ask, of the claims getting filed have something to do with employment. So that is your current employees and your former employees are the reason usually, except for other circumstances, that you're going to be dealing with the D&O claim within the next 10 years of your board service. Of the remaining, depending on who you ask, 20 to 10%, a big chunk of them are going to be coming from your fellow directors and officers on the board, donors, beneficiaries. That's probably the biggest next chunk, just people who are somewhat involved with either the development side, the management side, or people who are actually receiving the outflow of funds, not the services. The next biggest chunk after that is going to be people unhappy with the services they're receiving from the nonprofit. So every nonprofit is different. We talk. There's over 1.6 million nonprofit organizations. They all do different things. They all have different missions. The ones that are doing something in terms of trying to alleviate food deserts in the Houston area, like Third and Fifth Ward, that is usually going to be providing a service, rather than some different kind of nonprofits who are not really maybe directly engaging with people on that kind of a level. Okay, so and then the other ones are just kind of miscellaneous. When we do this presentation in 5 years, it's going to look different of what the miscellaneous category is going to include, because some of these are actually pretty new. It just goes with kind of what the changing politics of the time are and what mainstream media is paying attention to. Vendors, that usually doesn't surprise anybody. If you don't pay for your Dunder Mifflin paper, you don't pay for, you don't pay your rent, there's going to be an issue. The thing, especially in Houston, that is basically only increased in time since I moved to Houston is the not in my backyard type of situation. You're usually going to see that where these services and supports are being provided in more or less what are gentrifying neighborhoods. So it's going to be the people who are moving into the neighborhoods are not happy with the historical character and nature of the people who actually live in the neighborhood, and they take to the court system and they're trying to take down the nonprofits. So that's how, when you take a look at one of those original petitions, you can usually tell it's a NIMBY. That is why suit is getting filed over in whatever they're alleging. And the others are just really kind of a sign of the times. More or less, it's referred to as the intersectionality of hate. So these would be kind of political stunts or very well funded, what are usually designated by SPLC as hate groups, or have some connection to them, are just filing suit against nonprofits that are trying to serve segments of the population that they do not like. So that is something that is growing more and more. Probably nobody's surprised. That kind of started around the 2016 election time period and has only increased since then, and is probably likely to just increase from there. Last but not least, the kind of specialty nuanced ones that I will give you a case study on, but we probably won't spend too much time on, just because it is so huge and there's so many different types of these. More or less, it's the government coming after your nonprofits. So one example that I heard about from somebody else that I thought was interesting, just to tell you what one of those kind of claims would look like. So a charitable nonprofit applied for and received government funding. I believe, without knowing, because again, I know nothing about this. This is just with the little bit that I do know. I believe it was to deal with Ryan White funding. The government conducted an audit and determined that the government funds were not used for the purposes described in the funding application. The government commenced action seeking damages due to the alleged negligent misrepresentations in the application in violation of the False Claims Act. The lawsuit required the organization to compile and produce hundreds of thousands of documents to the government as part of the lawsuit. The organization incurred approximately $250,000 in defense costs before the government agreed to discuss settlement for a total of $300,000 on top of the $250,000. So, I mean, anybody who has done any amount of e-discovery knows how much time and times billable hours this is going to be of lawyer and paralegal work on even just 100,000 pages in e-discovery. So think about how much that is, and that explains why defense costs were roughly $250,000. And then the settlement was even more than that. So that's just kind of one example of how the government can come after you. In general, negligent misrepresentations, whether it is somebody else bringing in the suit or whether it's the government, type of claim like that is going to be problematic and it's going to be expensive. So we'll talk a little more about sampling of the types of claims, and I'll give you another couple of examples just to kind of think about as we run through some of these. Mismanagement of nonprofits' funds, that is a big one. For nonprofits who have a financial advisor on the board, this is usually going to be related to something they had a hand in. And the allegations can vary based on exactly what is being claimed, what the mismanagement was. We have your classic negligent acts that can include anything from you will absolutely get a 91A on it to something that is actually, is it negligence? Is it not? Something that you're going to have to actually get into discovery and depositions on. Breach of duty, again, I mean, these can be so frivolous looking that this is what you're going to be filing 91A on. Or it can be, something that you're actually going to have to get into discovery on, based on what the allegations are, what the evidence is going to show. Misleading statements, we already kind of had a sample of that. Defamation is a big one, in that, as we talked about, this is all, some of these can be really personal. Some of this is about throwing mud. Some of it's about being upset about things that, even though you're putting in the petition, you're upset about one thing. This case is really about something else. Okay, so one example we have for defamation. Former treasurer of a chamber of commerce filed suit against the organization's other board members, alleging that they made defamatory statements about the former treasurer regarding misappropriation of funds. The board members incurred approximately $50,000 in defense fees before the case was dismissed by the court. So that is one of those silver linings that, I mean, while defamation is very popular, sometimes you win on 91As and motions for summary judgment. So, I mean, just because anybody can file a case against anyone for anything at any time doesn't mean it's going to survive a dispositive motion. So actually talking about the 91As and the MSJs are probably beyond the scope of what we have time for here today. And really, this is kind of looking more about just why the nonprofits are getting sued, what the kind of claims are. So this is really, the CLE is basically going to stop once the claim or litigation has been filed. But if y'all are interested in that, that is something we can always do a part 2 of this CLE on. We can talk more offline. Just let me know, on or offline if you find that interesting, something we can absolutely talk about more. Wrongful employment acts is the big one, because roughly 80 to 90% of these claims getting filed have something to do in some way with a wrongful employment act. So that is everything. Racial discrimination in most parts of the country is what the big discrimination is. Anecdotally, what is interesting is a lot of the ones that are getting filed in Texas specifically are actually dealing with age discrimination, not racial, gender, or one of the other protected categories. So age discrimination is a huge issue in nonprofits. When you judge by what kind of claims are getting filed and what is actually getting litigated if they're not resolved pre-suit. Retaliation is a big one. With nonprofits, they receive any kind of either state or federal government funds. The whole whistleblower thing, that is kind of a big thing. Also in terms of when somebody else is going to file some kind of EEOC complaint or anything like that, and witnesses come forward to either tell what they know, and if it just incidentally supports the employee rather than the company, retaliation can be a thing that happens in those kind of situations, unfortunately. The others deal with failure to employ, failure to promote, wrongful demotion. So this is really anything having to do with the employment categories they're the big ones. And that's really because it just covers the entire gamut from somebody who applies and feels like there's a very specific reason why they didn't get interviewed and hired, or if they got interviewed, why they didn't get hired, what their pay rate is, especially in nonprofits that are being more transparent, either on purpose or by accident. Is many of those kind of claims can arise out of an email that was errantly sent to everybody, rather than, this person is starting at this salary that was supposed to just go to HR, but somehow that went to everybody. So that is how some of those kind of cases can start. Wrongful demotion, that usually is going to trigger a claim. If there's any kind of argument that they have to support why they were demoted, and there are so many examples of that. Review just one. Okay. Former employees filed suit after allegedly being demoted after complaining about egregious misconduct by the executive director of a social service organization. The organization also had financial issues that would have caused a public relations problem if the matter proceeded to trial. The matter settled for $645,000 with an additional $27,190 in defense costs. Okay, so the allegations that are hot right now, and this is from an anecdotal perspective, failure to detect embezzlement. These are the kind of cases where they are coming after the CPA or the auditor that sits on the board. Based on exactly what the relationship is between the CPA or auditor before they get on the board, if the nonprofit has some kind of long-standing or even just short-standing relationship with that person's CPA firm, usually it's going to be kind of a double whammy, that they're suing both the nonprofit, on the D&O side with the claim, and then it is also a professional liability claim against the accountant in the accountant's firm. And so what they're doing by that, it's a double whammy. And they're getting the nonprofit's D&O policy, if there is one. I mean, we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then they're also getting the CPA's professional liability policy from the CPA firm. This is a very easy claim to bring on the plaintiff side. It is a very difficult one to get through discovery, depositions, and actually have any evidence to support it. These are incredibly document and expert intensive. So these are really hot right now because things that are very document time intensive, expert intensive, normally somebody is going to want to settle them, and the more of them that get settled early on just incentivize more of these kind of claims getting filed, because what it looks like is just a piggy bank that if you just file it and kind of scare the other side, that then there might be a settlement. So when you see this kind of claim, failure to detect embezzlement, usually you look at who is making up the board, and you're going to find a CPA or auditor, and that is who the target is and who they're coming after. Every nonprofit is different based on how many CPAs or auditors are going to sit on the board. Some of them can be very heavy with CPAs and auditors. Some of them can be very light. But normally you're not very likely to see this against a nonprofit that just say has zero CPAs or auditors. Because what this is, it's basically a professional liability claim in, it's the wolf in sheep's clothing, which just happens to usually hit two different policies. The failure to review documents before signing, I think you all can guess, this is usually going to be targeting the lawyer who sits on the board, especially if there's just one lawyer. And more or less the argument is going to be, you're a lawyer, you went to law school, you like to read, contract stuff, you took those 2 classes 20 years ago. Why did you fail to review this contract before the board signed? So if you look at the kind of nonprofits these claims are getting made against, more likely than not, there's going to be at least one lawyer on the board, and that is who they're trying to come after on these. Assets being sold for unreasonably low prices. This gets into the whole fair market value kind of thing. And, the best advice is always just to understand what fair market value is and do the right thing. This does not impact every nonprofit. Most nonprofits usually, for tax reasons and for some other reasons, are not usually going to be liquidating assets. They're not going to be holding tons of assets either. So, this is usually going to be applied to a specific kind of nonprofit that is doing some kind of transactions with whatever kind of assets they have. And it looks completely unsupportable. It looks completely like this, it's self-dealing, or it's somebody's brother-in-law for pennies on the dollar. So, the best advice is always document everything, paper up everything, have something in the file to, when they say this is not sold at fair market value, a defense is usually better than no defense. And more likely than not, this can be applied to anybody, but in the boards where they're coming after the financial advisor for something, if the financial advisor had any kind of interest in the transaction, whether it's one of their clients from the financial advising side, whether it is their golfing buddy, their drinking buddy, something like that, it's usually the financial advisor that is going to be tangled up in whatever the allegations are. They're going to be the target of, this is the person who caused the situation. And that last but not least, the employment discrimination, which that can really be or look like anything. There are so many of these examples. I think we have about 25 minutes left. So I have a bunch of examples if we get towards the end and we still have some time. We are accredited for some ethics, so we will have to maybe speed through a little bit of this to get through the ethics. So if we have time at the end, we will revisit some of that a little more. Okay, so talking about nonprofit D&O insurance, one of my favorite topics. In general, this presentation is it's not a commercial for any specific carrier. We're not talking about any specific carrier in detail. We're not recommending anybody. There's no kickbacks. What we're just saying generally in this presentation is nonprofit D&O insurance is amazing for you to have. It doesn't matter which carrier or broker you get it from. You should probably have it if your nonprofit does anything. What surprises people is, when they say, "Oh, my nonprofit is filled with completely honest, best salt of the earth people. They always act in the best interest of the nonprofit. We have nothing to worry about. We'll never get sued." That could be 100% true. You can have the most honest board that always acts in the best interest of the nonprofit, that papers up every transaction they're going to do. They're the most honest, not racist, greatest people you've ever met. Still, any nonprofit can be sued for any reason, for any time, by anyone. As we talked about in a couple of these case examples, defense of a nonprofit D&O claim is usually not cheap. And the numbers we talked about, that had nothing to do with my firm or anything. That came from other firms. Every firm charges different hourly rates for whatever their lawyers and paralegals are. So, at that firm, that could maybe be a great deal versus if you compare it to another firm, maybe it's 2 or 3 times the price. Long story short, just defense costs are very, very expensive on nonprofit D&O claims, usually because the allegations are going to cover not just this tiny little single transaction, it's going to cover historical. So it's going to involve a lot of paperwork. It's going to involve usually a lot of people who need to be interviewed, deposed. They need to help out with written discovery. Documents need to be gathered. So that's the reason why these cases are not kind of like a zero eyewitness fender bender at the stoplight. There's basically 2 people to depose, the 2 drivers. There's no witnesses. There's not so much you need to do for a kind of case like that. Whereas these are usually complicated claims because what's being alleged is going to involve, at the end of the day, some kind of an expert on legal, accounting, otherwise. So these get complicated, which just drives up the defense costs. Normally when we're talking about nonprofit D&O insurance, they are usually going to cover allegations of negligence, wrongful acts, errors, omissions, breach of a fiduciary duty. There are always exceptions. There are, if you go carrier by carrier, some of them have very specific exceptions. Some of them word it differently. Some of them offer you kind of the whole platter. You can have this, you can have that, you cannot have that. So obtaining the actual nonprofit D&O insurance it's a conversation with either your broker or whoever you're working with. They want to get to know your nonprofit, what you all do. If you have employees, that's a much different nonprofit than if you don't. In general, there's always exceptions, exclusions, all that kind of stuff. Normally, your policy is going to protect the nonprofit entity as well as the key individuals, the D&Os. But this is the important thing. All policies are different. There are a number of different ways these policies can be structured. Some of them, it's specific people that are not going to be covered. Some of them, in certain circumstances, if that's the kind of nonprofit you want to run, it's only going to, say maybe it's going to cover the entity itself, but not the D&Os. So in another interesting survey, this is only a 1-hour CLE. We have about 20 minutes left, so we just don't have time to spend on this. And this is usually a topic that does not excite many people. So we're not going to talk about indemnification much. But in a recent national survey, well over half of nonprofit organizations surveyed were not financially solvent enough to indemnify their directors and officers if the lawsuit factory opened up in their neighborhood. So the initial question most people wanting to serve on a board is, do you all have the insurance? That's a very good first question. But some of the follow-ups are, is the nonprofit actually solvent enough to be able to make good on any of this? Especially the indemnification, especially as expensive as defense fees can get in some of these kind of complicated multi-year allegation cases. Talking about nuts and bolts of how these kind of policies work, they are almost always, but not necessarily always, just to have a little asterisk on that. They're going to be claims made. So, usually that's going to mean, so say the years and years and years before you join the board, remote board, multiple people before you even got affiliated with a nonprofit, they decided to go ahead and get the nonprofit D&O insurance. So if the claim is made during the year you're on the board, y'all are good. That's the claim's made. It is made during the year that you are on the board, that you have the policy, even if the claims are about something that happened 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, before you joined the board. So claims made is basically a gift to you from somebody well before your time on the board. So that is good for you. Coverage is a good thing if you're paying whatever you're paying for the insurance. And then the other thing to kind of consider is, for whatever reason, usually financial, especially in what we saw throughout the pandemic, a lot of nonprofits ended up just canceling their coverage for nonprofit D&O because, I mean, times were tough for everybody in the pandemic. Certain areas were a lot harder for other people and nonprofits than other things. So a lot of nonprofits let their coverage go. One option, though, depending on, it's very expensive, but if you compare what this is based on what they were paying for the actual policy, it's called ERP, extended reporting period. So if it worked out for a nonprofit, what they would do, they would cancel the coverage, effective today, but then they would then buy the extended reporting period, which usually it's pretty expensive. Not always, it depends. It's very kind of fact specific thing. So that would allow that, so additional claims that got made might actually be covered with that extended reporting period. Whereas otherwise, without ERP, your general rule is there's just no coverage period after your cancellation. So, that is part, this is not a sales CLE or anything, but, if you are a board member and you are trying to figure out why your board does or doesn't have nonprofit D&O insurance, these are some questions to talk about with your broker. Talk about, whether you have ERP if you don't have a policy. That is just good information for you to have to kind of understand nuts and bolts of a nonprofit D&O policy. So I said we would circle back on personal liability when we were talking about, what kind of shoes or what kind of car the person drives when that actually winds up in the original petition. So while this is absolutely not bulletproof, there are tons of exceptions. Generally, you are in much better standing if your nonprofit is incorporated than if you're not incorporated. If you're not incorporated, there's definitely some risks on personal liability, although, as always, it's going to depend. It's going to depend on a bunch of things. But if your nonprofit is incorporated, that is at least your best attempt to try and protect yourself from personal liability. However, even if your nonprofit is incorporated, there are so many exceptions. We just have a couple up here. Intentional acts, personal guarantees, that's normally going to be with a bank. Tax issues, that should not surprise anybody. The IRS likes their money. Commingling funds, that's for the lawyers in the crowd. You all know never to do that. That will get you in a lot of trouble. Illegal acts, there are so many more. We could spend a lot of time on that. But, personal liability is always a concern when you're serving on a nonprofit D&O board. The best things you can do is just make sure you have the most coverage as possible and avoid doing any things that is going to definitely take you outside and be an exception that would actually open you up to personal liability. Talking, relatively quickly, because we have about 15 minutes left, let's talk about the claimants. So personality theory from psychology has most people fitting into one of two camps. Type A is your competitive, you're hostile, you're now, or yesterday kind of person. That is your, type A is usually somebody that is difficult to work for and work with. They're all about just kind of, they're not one of the touchy-feely kind of people. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, you have your type B. So your type B is just cool, chillax, just the with turtle in the hair kind of thing. They're the turtle, things will get done as they get done, no worries, that kind of thing. I myself am a type B. I know a lot of type A's. It's okay. Just generally speaking about claimants, they're usually going to fall into the type A camp. That's how, they're not a no worries kind of person. What they're looking for is blood. That is why they either file the claim or the lawsuit pro se, or they go out and get just the most aggressive, angry looking lawyer they can find, who is just going to make this the most hostile and aggressive kind of claim or lawsuit possible. So, people who fall into the type A camp, that end up becoming plaintiffs or claimants. If you think about this from personality theory, it kind of makes sense because somebody on the type B end of the spectrum, they are going, if they ever do file a claim or, a lawsuit, they're willing to kind of just not make waves too much, and they're going to get out of the way. And, those are the ones that get settled pre-suit, usually pretty quickly. And they may or may not even need pre-suit mediation. It may be that simple just to resolve it based on what the claim is, whether it's credible, what is actually being alleged, without doing the discovery and depositions you would do once it actually gets filed as a suit. And if they have a reasonable expectation of if this is a valid claim and everything they're saying kind of seems on the up and up, what this is actually worth at the end of the day. So there's a lot of examples. Here is one case study, how quick it got settled and why the expenses were so much lower. A former female employee of a professional association claims sexual harassment by her supervisor and vicarious liability against the association for knowing about the harassment and failing to take remedial steps. Causes of action were brought for harassment and constructive discharge. Case mediated very early on in the case, settled for $17,500 and cost only $30,000 in defense. So, more likely than not, without knowing anything about the people involved in that case, when you hear, settled that early and settled for that little of defense costs, you're probably thinking that's a type B kind of person. When you heard about one of the examples with, $250,000 in legal fees and, it settled on the eve of trial, that's normally going to be your type A. So the kind of claims and litigation that are not easily solved, you're looking at a type A kind of person on the other side. Talking about just institutionalized inequality and FHA redlining, there are all of these factors that go into everything that has happened in a person's life and a family's life and in their community and in a community's kind of health, well-being, and existence since the community started. It's one way to look at it, which I think is probably the most helpful way I've ever seen put in such a concise way, comes from Terry Pratchett on the Boots theory. So this character earned $38 a month plus allowances, obviously those before inflation. A really good pair of leather boots would cost $50, but an affordable pair of boots, which were okay for a season or two and then leaked incredibly bad and then basically just dissolved, only cost $10. So if you get the $10 boots, those are the ones that are going to just wear out super fast and you're going to have to pay to replace them. But if he'd had $50 and been able to buy the good pair of boots, then he only would have needed to have bought one pair of boots and it would have lasted him forever rather than needing to continue to replace the cheap ones. So this comes from Terry Pratchett. It's the Captain Samuel Vine's Boots theory of socioeconomic unfairness. That it's a very helpful way to just think about some of these claims that are getting made. You have to look a little further than just the person that is sitting in front of you. There's a whole history that goes into this. And the whole history that goes into this, a helpful way to think about it is just what is on the news cycle and what is on claimants' minds. We've talked a little bit about some of the bad stuff of the pandemic. It disproportionately impacted lower SES families, socioeconomic status families. There is historical inequity. We're talking about FHA redlining, crumbling infrastructure, neglected urban or rural neighborhoods, underperforming schools in those areas. There are things that are in the news constantly, the lowered standard of living, decreasing life expectancy in America. Even our president is talking about shrinkflation now in Oreo cookie packages and in other things. That is a thing right now. That started well before the pandemic, but it just got bigger and bigger during the pandemic. There's a huge mistrust of institutions right now. It's an us versus them. When you drive down the highway, you can see litigation funders ads all over the place. These days, if you want to sue a nonprofit, it is very easy to find your own Peter Thiel or whoever else will fund lawsuits like that. And there are nuclear verdicts that you may hear about in the news that, multi-million dollar case where, it's a little surprising that a jury would give that much money for that kind of a case. And so those are in the news cycle and on the claimant's minds. And all of that factors into, what they're hearing, what they're thinking about, what they're feeling on a daily basis, which is going to impact do they think this is worth pursuing? And that is, they're thinking about what allegedly happened at the nonprofit, and is this worth suing them over? Yeah, as you evaluate claims, there, uh, so we have an XY axis here, just kind of for simplicity. It's basically, is what is being alleged or claimed so outlandish it is just not within the realm of reason. The example that we have, Richard Nixon is a space alien and other miscellany. If somebody files that, it's nothing for your nonprofit to worry about. That is just the rule. Anybody can file anything against anyone at any time. That is a classic example of it. On the other end of the spectrum, there are going to be there's a video of everything happening exactly the way the plaintiff claimant says it happened. And I mean, they came with receipts, and that is going to be an expensive kind of claim. So nonprofits usually want to avoid doing that on camera and leaving receipts and all of that. Okay, skip that. So for a lawyer, another kind of licensed professional who is going to agree to sit on a nonprofit board, I love this quote from Mark Cuban, work like there's someone working 24 hours a day to take it away from you. Those are the kind of people you're going to interact with when you serve on the board. There are former employees, current employees who are thinking about suing the nonprofit, thinking about suing you, thinking about trying to reach your personal assets if you walk in wearing fancy shoes one day. I mean, there everyone else we talked about, vendors, former board members. So that is just a consideration to have, which this really feeds on the CLE that we presented a couple months ago. Ronnie Hagerty from the United Way was the lead on that, and I kind of backed her up on the panel just talking about ethics. If it is your first time joining a nonprofit board, you want to be very careful about everything you do. You want to make sure you take an amazing class like Ronnie taught about nonprofit board leadership. You also want to attend, one of the people on the call, Anieti, has the HYLA Nonprofit Institute coming up. I think that's April 12th. So these are tremendous training opportunities for you if this is your first time serving on a board. There are, do's and don'ts of serving on a board, which are way beyond the scope of what I can cover in the next 2 to 3 minutes. But there are these resources through both the HYLA side and the HYLIP side on the Fellows Committee. That's one of the reasons why we started doing these monthly CLEs on the HYLIP side, just to talk about some of these topics. Like Ryan presented on the nonprofit board leadership. I had some ethics about that. I have slightly different ethics to talk about here in just a minute. Anieti's program is focusing on some real kind of nuts and bolts. So this is all kind of in the spectrum of if you are a HYLA member, go through the HYLA Leadership Academy. That is a great place to start your leadership journey. I graduated from HYLA Leadership Academy in the pandemic. It was an amazing experience. From that experience, I went on to do Leadership Houston. I highly recommend these kind of programs. If you are interested in any capacity in serving on a nonprofit board, there are incredible opportunities. You should definitely take our organizations up on that. And that will help prevent somebody from taking, everything you worked for away from you. If you know kind of what the general do's and don'ts are, and then you're surrounded by great people who have experience with this and will help you make good decisions. We already talked about fees. If I will go through this super fast, basically to say, if you're a lawyer serving on a board, there are 2 different things you can be, in addition to the nonprofit D&O capacity. We talked about the accountant. If the accountant has a relationship with a nonprofit, they can be hit for an accounting malpractice on top of whatever they did in their capacity as the nonprofit D&O. Same thing is going to go for a lawyer. A lawyer whose law firm represents or does some kind of legal services for the nonprofit can get hit if whatever the ultimate complaint is. They can get hit as the nonprofit D&O. They can also get hit for legal malpractice or it's usually a grievance on top of that. So everything that you do with your law license matters, even if it's not strictly speaking practicing law. It can all relate to each other. There is a difference between legal malpractice suits and grievances. The easiest way to boil this down in 10 seconds or less, basically, are there financial damages? Okay, so that's getting us to the ethics credit, which we are accredited for. You're welcome. So from the TDRPC, the preamble, one of the things that I really like, just when you need to remember why you're a lawyer, why you're doing what you're doing. We all work long hours. It's a stressful career. Some days are way more stressful than others. So The possible loss of that respect for the legal community and confidence is the ultimate sanction if you do something bad. So long as its practitioners are guided by these principles, the law will continue to be a noble profession. This is its greatness and its strength, which permits of no compromise. So just, it may be a while since you all have read the preamble. It's helpful to just kind of go back and feel good about being a lawyer if you need to feel good about being a lawyer with whatever you're going through. Sometimes we've all had emails from opposing counsel where we probably do need to go read the preamble and just take a minute. Okay, Rule 1.13, conflicts, public interest activities. Of course, lawyers are allowed to serve as a director, officer, or member of legal services, civic, charitable, or law reform organization, apart from whatever firm you practice in. But there are rules on that, of course. Rule 1.13, you should not knowingly participate in a decision or action of the nonprofit if participating in the decision would violate the lawyer's obligations to a client under Rule 106, that's the general conflict rule, or B, where the decision could have a material adverse effect on the representation of any client of the organization whose interests are adverse to a client of the lawyer. So that's a lot to unpack, which we don't have time for, but read Rule 1.13. It's a good rule. And then we get into the comments. That just gives a little more information. Yes, I would also recommend reading the comments if you do read Rule 1.13. Okay, with our final minute, what else is trending? Premiums for nonprofit D&O policies are getting more expensive in general. If y'all have renewed homeowners insurance or you've renewed your auto insurance lately, I'm sure you can relate. All premiums are just getting more expensive. In some states like California and Florida, some carriers are no longer even offering policies. And so that's just kind of what some of the trends are these days. In Texas, we are spared from that quite a bit. Okay, so nuclear verdicts plus social inflation equal higher overall limits are required. In general, most nonprofit D&O policies are going to have $1 million limit. Most, but not all, are going to be eroding. So that means any dollar that is spent on the defense is going to eat away what the limit is to actually settle with. So that's how, for eroding policies, that can be very, very, very impactful to get an early settlement because the plaintiff and the claimant want you to pay them, not to pay the defense firm. So when you have an eroding policy, that is just something to be aware of. That can usually provide a good amount of leverage if you're trying to get an early, efficient resolution, especially if it's even going to be pre-suit and it's going to save reputational damage of your nonprofit getting sued. So that's how, the plaintiff side lawyers, exactly what they're doing. They know when it's an eroding policy, they make a reasonable demand and things get settled very fast. And that avoids the nonprofit getting hit with very unfortunate press because once it's filed, it's public record until it gets sealed. And, not everything gets sealed, basically. If y'all have seen me present on the for-profit side, or when we talk about legal malpractice, accounting malpractice, those kind of cases, we usually talk about a high SIR as a possibility. It's not for everybody, but that is one way to reduce your premium. That SIR is self-insured retention. That is just not an option for nonprofit D&O policy. It's because nonprofits don't sit on tons of cash and be able to pay the self-insured retention before the insurance is going to have to pay anything, which is a lot different than, if you are at a for-profit oil company who has tons of money, stocked away for a rainy day. They can write a check for $500,000 and not have to deal with insurance on that. That way they control how fast they settle. They don't, it's not going to impact the rates, anything like that. They're just paying it. That's the high self-insured retention, which means their premium is super low. That is not for everybody though. That is my big takeaway on a high SIR. Just make sure fact specific is going to work for you before you agree to that. Last but not least, I often get asked who does well in a professional liability practice that's going to include defending, a nonprofit D&O kind of claims and litigation like we talked about today. So the ideal person enjoys puzzles, thinks that they're fun, not homework. Somebody who's a good storyteller. So I did high school theater. I did junior high debate. I love telling stories. When I get to actually do an opening statement in front of the jury, that is, I think, the best thing you can do as a lawyer. That's why I love going to trial. I'm not scared of that. I will be down there trying any case, anytime. Just sign me up for it. So somebody who has the ability to come into these cases where absolutely terrible things are being alleged and trying to just tarnish the name of this nonprofit, somebody who can come in, kind of figure out what the facts are, figure out how to spin it, figure out what the evidence is, what's going to be admissible, take the depositions, figure out what the story is, and figure out how you want to tell it. That is the number one skill if you want to be a trial lawyer rather than a litigator. The difference is, like we go and try these cases. We're not scared of them. We love trying cases here. A litigator is somebody who likes to sit in their office. They will send some emails, do some written discovery, but they don't want to try a case. And that is fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Trying cases is stressful, but it's fun. It's just not for everybody, and that is okay. Another thing that makes you amazing in a professional liability practice, somebody who has this lived-in experience of doing pro bono volunteer service engagements out in the community. That way, you know the kind of people that get involved, you know some of the situations, you've seen it firsthand, you can talk the talk, you can walk the walk. That is essential when you're dealing with one of these high stress, high profile, in the news kind of nonprofit Dino claim, where all this absolutely terrible stuff is getting alleged against your client, and they need to know, you know how the nonprofit works. You know how to kind of talk the talk, walk the walk about what board meetings look like, what gets said at board meetings, what ends up in the board meeting minutes. They absolutely love having somebody who currently serves on another nonprofit board. They like knowing you put your money where your mouth is in the community. Last but not least, if you have any prior experience in the professional area, especially if you were an accountant before you went to law school, if you were a financial advisor before you went to law school, that is amazing. Last but not least, I will leave you with parting words from our immortal Dennis Morton of Peloton. If you can't be good, be careful. So I'm going to stop screen share. I will put the CLE number in the chat. If y'all have any questions, you can either drop them in the chat right now, or you can come on camera, talk to me. Okay, this is the MCLE number I'm putting in the group chat. If y'all do not save it before the session ends, just email me. I will send it to you. I am going to Law Harrington to volunteer with my HBA committee. So we're doing a pro bono estate planning clinic. Law Harrington, that's the Indigent Senior Living Center for indigent LGBTQ plus people in the community. So that is me attempting to put my actions into thoughts to go out and do some pro bono. Any questions from anybody?
Thanks, Daniel. I just want to say thank you. This was incredible and so informative. And thank you also for the plug for the Nonprofit Institute. This is fantastic. Thanks so much. And I'd like to help with that clinic. I'll read.
Awesome. Well, and I thank you for everything that you do. You are the nonprofit volunteer person that I always go to. You're the one that set up the day of the food bank 2 or 3 years ago when we were just coming out of the pandemic. So yeah, and you are an amazing resource. I'm so glad that you did set up that HYLA, the Nonprofit Institute. That's an amazing opportunity and a great bridge for people who are either thinking about the HYLA Leadership Academy or
yes,
in the middle of HYLA Leadership Academy.
Yes, exactly. We're hoping it can be help along with attending CLEs like this, a pipeline of young lawyers into nonprofit leadership. So thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I would just say thank you again to everybody that spent their time with us here today. I really do appreciate you all showing up. The CLE initiative through the HYLA Fellows Committee was our little baby this year. Miriam and I have worked pretty hard on this, so we really do appreciate you all spending an hour to come out with us every month. We are still working on our topics for next month, but we do have Alex Roberts from Beck Red, and he's presenting our May CLE. That is the third Wednesday of May. I don't have my calendar in front of me. I think that's the 18th plus or minus, but whatever the third Wednesday is, hopefully y'all will be able to come back and join us for that one. We will be in touch about the April CLE if we have any additional information on that. Beyond that, I will just say thank you again. If y'all have any follow-up questions, just shoot me an email. We will talk about it. Give me a call. I think this is a very interesting topic. So if you think it is too, I was happy to continue the conversation. So I'm going to hit stop recording.